JavaScript is one of the most popular languages used today, and quite frankly, I can't teach you all of it in whatever clickbait time I've put as the title of this video. However, I can get you jump-started on JavaScript and help you understand as you approach your projects and 1 hour long JavaScript YouTube videos, 10 hour long sometimes. I can get you jump-started on this and help you to, instead of watching and reading and just diving into material, you can instead work on projects as you go with a base understanding and then learn as you Google things, look at Stack Overflow, look at w3schools.com, all those great resources. So to start out, JavaScript is a client-side language. What that means is instead of being compiled on a server like other languages, for example, like if you had Python on a website, you would have to host a server and then compile Python on that server. Versus JavaScript is run on your user's browsers. So as you load a website with JavaScript, your web browser runs the JavaScript for the user instead of you having to pay to run the JavaScript. That makes JavaScript very convenient and nice. And while it can't do anything fantastic like manage huge databases and stuff, it can do arithmetic and have cool effects go on your user screens and all kinds of other things. Now, what you're learning in JavaScript can be applied to the server end using a thing like Node.js, which is a backend JavaScript package. So what you're learning can be used in the backend, but Node.js is kind of a different beast, and perhaps I'll make a video on that in the future. But anyway, let's get started. On my desktop, I'm going to make a quick folder for this tutorial. I'm going to call it tutorial. You don't have to do so. I'm going to open this up in VS Code. As per usual. I have videos on VS Code if you would like to learn, but it's nothing too crazy. I'm going to make a new file in this folder. I'm going to call this index.html. That's right, you do have to have an HTML knowledge to do this. I have a video on HTML if you so please, but it's not too much HTML, so you don't have to be a master. Anyway, I'm going to use my abbreviation to get a sort of start on this HTML document. I'll call it JavaScript in the title, just to be cheeky. So how JavaScript works is it's just like CSS. If you've worked with CSS, you know that you sort of import the CSS file. So I'll show you how to do that. At the bottom of your body, you're going to make a script and you're going to say source. Just like that. See? So as an attribute of the script tag, I'm going to have source, and I'm going to set that equal to whatever my JS file is called. So say I name it main.js. My JS file, I make a main.js, and that is imported. Another way to do this is to actually type inside of the script tag, just in here, just like as you would do CSS in the head. You can do this down here. You can do this in the head as well, but typically you want your JavaScript to load after your website because the effects aren't as important as the content, to be frank. You don't need all the math to be happening as you're loading things in normally. Unless you really know what you're doing, you can put it up in the head, but just to start, just as a rule, put it at the bottom of the body. So to start out, I'll show you kind of the most simple hello world kind of thing. You can see that this HTML file, this HTML file currently has nothing in it, right? So instead of making a div and putting something in here like this where I would say hello world, what I can do is do document dot, and then I say write. That is the method we'll be using. So just if you're new to programming, I'll explain this briefly. So what I'm doing is I'm essentially calling an object. So the document is an object. That's why you'll hear it called the DOM a lot in like JavaScript books and videos and stuff. The DOM is just referring to the HTML. So the body, any divs or paragraphs or whatever you have in there, that's what you're accessing with document. So you're really accessing the body here. And then I'm saying write. So dot write, that is a method. Whenever you have a dot after some sort of word or object, that is a method. So we're writing to the document, and then we open parentheses, and then we say what we want to write inside these quotes. I'll say hello world, because I'm basic. And then you want to have a semicolon at the end of every line. So we'll save that, and wow, look at that, hello world. So this isn't anything different than what you would do with normal HTML. And you don't want to make entire websites like this, but you can kind of understand how we're accessing the document and we're writing to it. So now we'll do something a little more programming. We'll make a variable. So in JavaScript, variables are all just vars. In other programming languages, they're like int or string or something. You have to define what kind of variable you're using. In JavaScript, though, you just say var, and then it's smart and it figures it out. So I'm going to name this var a, and I'm going to set it equal to 5. This is just like a variable in math. If you've taken math, it's like x equals 5, a equals 5. You can name your variables whatever you want. You can call this Mike. I can name the variable after myself, right? I'll keep it at a, so I won't be vain. And then I will write that to the document, just like I did hello world. And you can see I don't use the quotes here, because the quotes indicate that something is text. This is a number, so I don't need to have quotes. In fact, if I had quotes around this, it would just print the letter A. I want it to print this variable that I've saved, so I won't use quotes. You can see 5 is printed right after hello world, just like we liked. I'll get rid of hello world just so we just see the numbers for now. So another thing that's useful as you're writing code, let's say this variable A had a secret meaning that 5 was a constant. So I'm going to double slash. This is how you would comment. So comments aren't actual code. This isn't being run by the compiler. It's just so other people can read it. And as you're writing code, you want to use comments. It's very important. So I would define A, and like I would say, A is a constant of gravity on Venus. Whatever A is in your project. If you're making a project that other people will read, you want to comment. If you're making a project that you'll look at in a couple of months and you're going to forget what all your work is, you want to comment just so people can read it a little easier. Anyway, comments aren't too important. Let's get back to the coding. Another thing you can do is you can add, subtract, divide, multiply. You can do all kinds of different operations to variables. So I can say a plus 5. That should be 10. I can say a divided by 5. Should be 1. It's just like a calculator, but with code. I can do multiplied by 5. It's 25. I can do remainder 25. So percent sign gives you the remainder of whatever it is. So 5 divided by 5 has no remainder. If I did 5 divided by 6, I'd have 5 remainder, right? Another thing you can do with Java is create an array. Now, what is an array? An array is a list. That's pretty much all there is to it. So if I were to make an array, I would use these square brackets, just like that. And then I can just list whatever I want in here. I can say 1, 5. I can put a string, hello world. Let's see, I can put another array. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's move that above our document dot, right? And so, oops. Oh, whoops, I forgot to name it. That's the problem. You need to name your variables. After you say var, name of the variable equals, and then whatever the thing is. So in this case, I should have written a name. I'll call it B. So now if I want to write B, you'll see it just blabs out the list with commas in between. If I want a specific one, let's say I just want the hello world, I need to give its place in line. So I would do that by putting brackets right after B, and then hello world is in third place. Now you would think you would put 3 here. Let's see what happens if I do. You can see it actually lists out that array at the end. The reason why is because arrays start at 0. That's something you're really going to want to internalize. Unless you're working in like MATLAB or something, that's pretty much the only programmer, besides R, I guess. Unless you're working in MATLAB or R, normally programming languages all start at 0. So if I do B of 0, it's going to give me the first one. So if I really wanted hello world, I would say B of 2. This is a little funky at first, but you're going to have to get used to it really quick because that is how it is. So B of 2 is hello world. B of 3, like I showed you earlier, is that array. Since this is an array inside of an array, if I want a specific part of this, like let's say I just want the 3, I need to put another set of square brackets right after that and give that particular one's location. So you can see a B of 3 of 2 is 3. So anyway, that's enough of arrays for now. We'll keep that array there. I'm going to show you how to make a function. So a function, just like it is in math, it takes some input. It doesn't have to, but it can take some input, and then it gives you an output. It can also just do something. It can be a line of code that is repeated. You can put that all in a function. We'll go into that in a second, but for now, let's do something. We're going to make a function that adds 2 numbers together. So the way that you write this is you say function, and then you name it. So let's call this C, and then you put those parentheses there. And inside those parentheses, you give it its arguments. What arguments are it's essentially like if you had f of x, it would be the x. So in this case, we're going to be adding 2 things together. We don't want to name them as a and b because that would be confusing in case we wanted to add c and d or any other variable later. So for now, I'm just going to call them first, comma, second. You can see I put the comma in between the 2 arguments. Then after the round brackets, I use curly brackets, and then I say return first plus second. And then that is my function right there. If I were to say write C of A, comma, B of 0. So I'm adding 5 plus 1 there. Oops, B of 0. You can see 5 plus 1 is 6, so our function works. Another thing you can do, you don't necessarily have to have arguments here. If I were to get rid of the arguments and I just wanted C to return 1 plus 1 every time, I could get rid of the arguments here as well. And then you can see 1 plus 1 is 2, of course. Okay, so that's enough of functions. Now we're going to go quickly into for loops. So a for loop, essentially what a for loop is it loops over something several times. So let's say I wanted to print B 5 times to the document, but I didn't want to have to write it every time because I didn't want to do this because that is kind of arduous, especially if you want to do that hundreds of times. So I'm going to say a for loop, and I'm going to tell this to run 5 times. How I do that is I need to make a variable inside of the parentheses here. And typically you call this variable I. I won't go too in depth about what's going on here. You can look into that on your own time because it takes a minute. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm making a variable and I'm watching it count up several times. So I'm going to set it equal to I. I'm going to wait until I is less than 5. So since it's going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that'll be 5 runs. And then I'm going to add 1 to I after every loop. So now I'm going to write whatever it was I wanted to write. Let's print I 5 times, or A 5 times, sorry. So you can see that printed A 5 times, just like that. This can be useful for all kinds of things. Okay, lastly, I'm going to teach you guys a little bit about accessing the document. So let's say instead of making something, we wanted to change something. We'll do that real quick. I'm going to make a div, and I'm going to give it an ID. The reason I'm giving it an ID is so that it is special. That way, if I added more divs later and I only wanted to access this one with JavaScript, it wouldn't ruin everything else. So I'm going to name this, so I'm going to give this the ID of test. And that should be fine. Inside test, I will put the text. Here, let's get rid of everything else. I'm going to put the text, hello world. Okay, so we can see hello world is on our document. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same document. And this time, instead of writing, I'm going to get an element by ID. You can see you can also do class name or tag name. Typically, you use ID though, so that you don't kind of grab the entire document, right? And this ID name is test. And this time, I'm going to set the inner text, and I'm going to set that equal to hello universe. And then you can see it changed it to hello universe. So that's kind of an idea of accessing the document. Okay, so now you understand enough JavaScript to get started, and definitely enough JavaScript to start some sort of project. If you'd like a challenge of some sort, try and make a calculator with buttons and different operations. Just a hint, you're going to have to look up how to get user input, but it's really not that hard. And you're going to want to make functions for each of the different calculator operations. All right, so have fun with that. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed the video, and have a nice day.